Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is Abida Ashraf. I welcome you all on behalf of MK, Purdue University, and Human Rights Chair, University of the Punjab. This is going to be our third webinar on solidarity across borders under the banner of One World, One Struggle. Let me introduce the idea of One World, One Struggle. It is the idea of an interconnected world, stressing empathy and understanding across borders. It encourages individuals and communities to recognize their commonalities rather than focusing on differences. By promoting a sense of global solidarity, this webinar under the banner of One World, One Struggle encourages collaborations, advocacy, and activism to address the root cause of injustice and alleviate the sufferings of the oppressed. Today's webinar is with reference to Palestine. As I said earlier, that this is going to be our third webinar in this series. I warmly welcome our guest, Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh, and we are honored to have him in our seminar. Dr. Qumsiyeh, he is a renowned professor, scientist, and human rights advocate, currently serving at Bethlehem University, as well as directing the Palestine Museum of Natural History and the Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability. With a PhD in biology from Texas Tech University, he has held faculty positions at Duke, Yale, and the University of Tennessee. His research covers genetics, molecular biology, biodiversity, and conservation. His scientific contributions are widely recognized through numerous publications. Dr. Qumsiyeh is also celebrated for his dedication to human rights and environmental justice. He is author of prominent books like Sharing the Land of Canaan and Popular Resistance in Palestine. These works highlight his commitment to social justice and sustainability. His role at the Palestine Museum of Natural History emphasizes both the preservation of local biodiversity and the promotion of education on ecological and social issues, reflecting his dual focus on science and advocacy. Thank you very much, Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh, for taking our time and accepting our invitation, joining us for this webinar. I'm happy that Dr. Bushra, Professor Dr. Bushra Hamidur Rahman, who is the president of MCAP, has also joined us. And as a dean, she's also working at Beacon House National University. Thank you, Dr. Bushra, for joining us. Before proceeding on, I would like to explain a little bit about the format. In the first round, we will have a discussion with Dr. Qumsiyeh, Mazin Qumsiyeh, and then followed up by a student from Malaysia. He's an activist and promoting the cause of Palestine, and followed by questions. Audience can write their questions in chat box, which will be taken by Dr. Artz and directed to Dr. Qumsiyeh. So thank you very much once again. Now I will request Dr. Artz to pose a question. Before proceeding on, I would like to introduce Dr. Artz as well. Thank you, Dr. Artz. We are very delighted and warmly welcome our co-host, Dr. Artz from Purdue University. Dr. Artz is a professor of media studies and director of the Center for Global Studies at Purdue University Northwest. Professor Lee has 12 books on his credit, including Global Media Dialogues, Industry Politics and Culture, Spectacle and Diversity, Transnational Media and Global Culture, and The Pink Tide, Media Access and Political Power in Latin America. Dr. Lee has contributed dozens of book chapters and research articles on global media, US popular culture, and social justice movements. Thank you, Dr. Lee, for supporting us and beautifully playing this role of leadership. Thank you very much. I will request you to engage Dr. Qumsiyeh in discussion and pose your questions.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Abida Ashraf. And thank you, Dr. Qumsiyeh, for joining us today. We have several questions that we are going to pose to you, and we'd like you to comment on those. Bethlehem, where you are located, is often considered the birthplace of Jesus. But the strange thing for me, the Christian groups in the United States continue to support genocide in the midst of calls by the United Nations General Assembly for a permanent ceasefire. Both the US and US Christian groups attacked the global movement for a ceasefire. So my question is, what contribution does Christian Zionism make to Israel?
Thank you for having me, first of all, on this important discussion, because we all need to discuss how our struggles are connected around the globe. In this regard, in regards to Christianity, my family is Christian. I was born just down the hill from here in the shepherd's field, where the shepherds heard the angels sing according to our tradition, telling them of the birth of Jesus just up the hill from the shepherd's field. Having been raised in this Christian milieu, if you want, I understand what Christianity is about. And after all, we are the first Christians in the world. So nobody is going to teach us Christianity, and Christianity is very clear about what it stands for. So we are mystified that some Christians have been deluded into supporting Zionism, a colonial racist ideology that's built on ethnic cleansing and genocide that has been going on for 8 decades now. Now, to analyze it scientifically, if you want, my background is medical genetics and biology, and I like to look at things scientifically. I always look for the etiology of the problem. And I find that the etiology of the spreading of Christian Zionism in the West, primarily in Holland and in the United States, came after the British government took on the Zionist project for political agendas. And they introduced something called the Schofield Bible, which was a distorted version of what reality is. It's basically the New Testament and the Old Testament connected together and linked by commentary that Mr. Schofield allegedly engineered, that connects Jesus's message to the Old Testament. This is a misinterpretation of the Bible. I don't want to make this a theological discussion. There are more experts than I have who have analyzed this silliness, I should say, of thinking that Christianity should support Israel because in the Old Testament it mentions about the rapture and Armageddon and all this stuff. Jesus actually is our reference, and Jesus was very clear in his message. He said, you heard in the old days, an eye for an eye, I tell you, and a tooth for a tooth. I tell you, somebody hits you on the right cheek, you turn the left cheek to them, and so on. So Jesus was certainly not in favor of colonization and ethnic cleansing by military means that the Zionist movement has created. And so for us as Palestinian Christians, and I would add for the majority of mainstream denominations of Christianity, be it Catholicism, Orthodox, etc. My family is mixed. I have Lutheran on one side, Greek Orthodox on the other. for the majority of the mainstream Christians, the idea of Christian Zionism is an oxymoron, actually. You cannot be both a Christian and a Zionist at the same time. And there's plenty of books done by people like Don Wagner and Stephen Sizer and many others that analyze the theological aspects of this, and the fact that Zionism is a corruption of Judaism in the same way that Constantinian Christianity and the Crusaders and Christian Zionism are a corruption of Christianity.
Thank you. Thank you.
How has the Palestine crisis affected the region's natural environment and biodiversity?
Yeah, thank you for that.
And can you describe any specific environmental challenges or changes you have observed as a result of this genocide? And what has been the response of Palestinian students and faculty on this?
Right. Since the beginning of the Zionist project, which was a late 19th century idea implemented really in the early 20th century, the idea was very simple: to take a country that's multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, and even multilingual society, and make it a Jewish state of Israel. This is transformation of Palestine into the so-called Jewish state of Israel. This is displacement settler colonialism, and we have many dozens of examples of displacement settler colonialisms around the world. All of them impacted not only the lives and livelihood of the local people, but also the lives and livelihood of animals and plants in that area. I give you examples. For example, the destruction of the buffaloes in North America when the Europeans came, changing even directions of rivers and so forth. In Australia, for example, the Europeans destroyed a lot of the native habitats, brought also invasive species that devastated the local environment. So in all situations of colonialism, there's an impact not just on the people, there's an impact on the environment. Specifically, in the case of Palestine, since the beginning of the Zionist project, they thought of destruction of our environment and reshaping our landscape to create a Europeanized version of our country, which is, of course, ancient country with people here having been the first actually location where humans migrated out of Africa some 100,000 years ago. From Palestine, actually, humans migrated to the rest of the world. And Palestine has been very rich in natural resources and in biodiversity. We have to remember that Palestine is the western part of the so-called Fertile Crescent, where humans first developed agriculture around 12,000 years ago. That's where we humans first domesticated plants and animals and became, instead of hunter-gatherers, became farmers and pastoralists and so forth. So people have lived in harmony with this very rich environment, very beautiful land. Even in the Old Testament, in the Torah, it says it's a land of milk and honey. Yesterday we actually harvested our honey from our own garden, etc. So Palestine has always been very rich. What did the Zionists do to this? They destroyed it. They pretty much destroyed our landscape. Let me give you just a few examples. When Israel was created in 1948, 1949, they destroyed 534 Palestinian villages and towns, but they didn't just destroy the dwellings of the people who lived there. They also uprooted the trees around these villages and towns. Millions of trees were uprooted both domestic trees and wild trees. Domestic trees like olives and figs and almonds, and wild trees like carobs and hawthorn and oaks. And they bulldozed all these trees. And they said they planted some trees. Yes, they did bring some European trees, Pinus saripensis, European pine tree. They planted it everywhere. This is replacement forestry, replacing a previous mixed wooded areas, as I mentioned, domestic and wild trees, and planting a monoculture of pine trees, which was devastating for biodiversity. Also, pine trees in a dry climate don't do very well. They grow, but they burn very quickly. So fires rage in places like the Galilee and West Jerusalem and other places where Israel planted those trees to replace Palestinian trees. This is one example of a mega project that they did. Another example of a mega project is diversion of the water of the Jordan River basin from Lake Tiberias to the west. This dried up the Jordan River. It's no longer a river. It dropped down from flowing at 1,350 million cubic meters per year to only 20 million cubic meters per year. And that's barely a stream. You walk across it in and this also shrinkage of the so-called Dead Sea, which is neither nor dead. It's an inland salt lake. But anyways, it's shrinking, and this is devastating the biodiversity around this area, devastating the biodiversity in the Jordan Valley as a whole, and the basin of the Upper Rift Valley. This is a second example. The third example is the draining of the wetlands of the Hula area in the north, and this has devastated the ecosystem there. These wetlands were very important for bird migrations, etc. So not only did they ethnically cleanse the Palestinian villages, about 12 Palestinian communities around the wetlands, but they also destroyed habitat for many species of plants and animals, and 219 species have actually completely disappeared from the area. I cite just 3 examples. I could go on forever. Of course, this is an area that we do a lot of research on. We publish books and articles, research articles on these areas and on the impact. My last paper relevant to this was on the impact of the genocide on Gaza on the environment. And Israel dropped 70,000 tons of bombs on Gaza. That's equivalent to 6 Hiroshima-sized nuclear bombs on an area of 360 square kilometers. So you can imagine the environmental impact of this. Anyway, we publish research papers on this, and we're now doing another research paper on Gaza, looking at using remote sensing to study the impact on the agricultural areas in Gaza and so on.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Qumsiyeh. I wonder if you would talk a bit about the other organization that you direct, the Palestine Museum of Natural History.
The Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability is an institute founded 10 years ago with the vision of sustainable human and natural communities. Now, this sounds like a lofty vision to have sustainability under colonization, or try to have sustainability under colonization. But there's a lot of work that we can do along those lines of sustainability. So the Institute includes many things like the Museum of Natural History, a botanic garden, a museum of cultural heritage, etc., because we want to preserve not only our natural heritage, but also our cultural heritage, which is also being directly impacted because, like, for example, they are destroying museums and universities in Gaza. The attack on our cultural heritage is manifest. But anyway, how do we do this? At the Institute, we have 4 main areas. One is research, and I mentioned the examples of the research that we are doing. We're doing a lot of research, for example, on impact of wars and impact of Israeli industrial settlements and other. Let me turn off my video because it consumes a lot of bandwidth. But anyways, I was saying the 4 areas we work on include research, number 1. Number 2 is learning, and learning for creatively changing our circumstances. That's empowerment, that's basically liberation, basically resistance. As you mentioned, I wrote a book called Popular Resistance in Palestine, a History of Hope and Empowerment. So the second area is this learning to affect a change for resistance. And the third area we work on is conservation of natural habitats and areas that are worth conserving. And the fourth area is community service, like working with farmers, marginalized communities like Bedouins that are near the wall, that Israel is trying to destroy their lives and livelihood, etc., and working with them to empower them. That's community service. Of course, with women, we have women workshop coming up this Thursday, for example, that is about empowering women to make their own products.
Our guest is Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh from Bethlehem University, where he directs the Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, and he's also the founder and director of the Palestine Museum of Natural History. He's back with us again. This is a problem of our technology, our connections between here and Palestine. So we're doing the best we can.
Well, I mean, there is actually bandwidth. Israel refuses to give us bandwidth for internet, but we're still better off than Gaza. Israel also reduced water for us here in the Bethlehem district, for example. Just for this summer, when we are most desperate for water, they reduced allocation of water to us by 40% in the Bethlehem and Hebron areas. So they are trying to make life very, very difficult for us here.
I have been reading your book, Popular Resistance in Palestine, and one of the things that impressed me was you seem to avoid judging nonviolence or armed struggle. You understand those as a continuum of popular resistance. So you also, the other thing that struck me is you also made a connection between human evolution and how we culturally learn to either respond in kind or, as you said before, turn the other cheeks. At the same time, it seems that international law recognized the right of armed struggle and armed resistance. So I just wondered if you would comment on that a bit when you're talking about the broad spectrum of popular resistance to Zionism in Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, from my background as a scientist, I only describe what I see. And when I make the right diagnosis, which is displacement, settler colonialism that we have here, you can look at the resistance and understand that it's a natural outcome for colonialism to have resistance. Why? Because colonialism is violence. I cannot come to your home and land, whether it's in Purdue or Punjab or whatever, and say, hey, would you kindly move away so that I can build my own or have your house free? It cannot be done nicely. It is done violently. Colonialism is done violently, and all colonialists are violent people by nature of the beast of displacement settler colonialism. So resistance is also a natural outcome of this. And resistance in the local people, if you look at it, whether it's in North America, whether it's in South Africa, under colonialism from Dutch and British colonizers, or Australia, or New Zealand, or anywhere else, that Europeans colonized, there's a spectrum of resistance, and it's usually a bell-shaped curve of resistance. Most of it is nonviolent resistance, and that's understandable because most people do not have access to arms, do not have inclinations to do armed resistance. A small part of it at one end of the curve is armed resistance of various degrees and various levels. That's natural for all colonial, anti-colonial struggles. I'm just being practical here, and as a scientist, I describe it, not my wishful thinking, of course. And you can have wishful thinking about methods of resistance, but this is the reality of colonialism, anti-colonialism. Colonialists are violent far more than the indigenous people. Indigenous people usually inflict far less violence on the colonizers than the other way around. So the ratio of dead people, if you want, colonizers to colonized, is usually 1 to 12, 1 to 15, in some cases 1 to 50, for example, in Australia with the Aborigines, or in the United States. In South Africa was 1 to 12. In our case, it's about 1 to 17, the ratio of colonizers, Zionists killed, or Palestinians killed. So I wrote the book about popular resistance, focusing, of course, on the non-armed forms of resistance, because most people don't know about them and don't know that this is 99.9% of the resistance. So people needed to be aware of it, and it's intentionally shielded from international, media coverage. But anyways, you are also absolutely right that international law is very clear. It says colonized, oppressed people have a right to resist, and I quote international law, by any means they choose. By any means they choose. Obviously, the local people have a right, have a choice, what methods they use. So this is international law. It allows you to use armed resistance, it allows you to use unarmed resistance, or what some people prefer to call nonviolent resistance. We don't use the term nonviolence, by the way, because the same reason that Mahatma Gandhi refused to use that term. When he was asked about it, he said, that's a negative terminology, and I'm not doing it against violence or anything else. I'm doing what I'm doing as satyagraha and ahimsa, as forms of proactive resistance. So as he called it satyagraha and ahimsa, we call it popular resistance in Arabic, muqawama sha'biyya. That's what we engage in.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. As you mentioned, that the colonizer Zionists who are killing in Palestine, the ratio is like 1 to 17. And the people colonized are not left with any option other than the resistance. We see that in this global world, students are actively supporting this cause of Palestinians by leading different protests. And we see a student-led global intifada emerging from US, and that spread across Asia and Europe as well. However, the response from Middle East is almost absent. So what are the reasons What are the factors behind the lack of expression and the absence of this strong resistance?
Well, I'll start by telling you a personal story. I became involved first as a student at the university in activism, not for Palestine, it was for South Africa. I was elected to be president of the International Student Club in 1980, January 1980, in the United States when I was at the University of Connecticut. And this black Nigerian guy comes to me and he says, hey, congratulations on being president of our club as international students. What are you going to do about South Africa? Remember, this is January 1980. And I was so naive and ignorant, 22, 23-year-old kid. I said, what's wrong with South Africa? And of course, he educated me about apartheid and racism and all of this stuff. And we ended up bringing a speaker from London, who many years later I found out was a member of the African National Congress, then banned by the United States as a terrorist organization. But anyways, from that period, I noticed how university students are usually the lead in activism, in doing things in the West, in other countries, etc. Of course, in our countries, I mean, I don't want to say that, we are, when I was at Jordan University, we were active, of course, in my bachelor degree. But we were in the Arab milieu and everybody supports Palestine, so it was not as important activism as doing it in the West or in other countries. We did it nevertheless. Now, why do some people engage and some people don't engage is really your question. And I think there are, again, as a scientist, I can look at variables and I can analyze them and I can do a study even on this subject. I've never did the actual study for particular locations. I did a study in the US to understand a little bit about why some people are apathetic and don't care about Palestine when really their taxes are supporting this genocide. And apathy is a very interesting phenomenon in human evolution, if you want. It has to do with self-protection and walking, as we say in Arabic, al-hayt al-hayt, the wall, next to the wall, because I'm always watching around me, see who's going to attack me. So I want to just protect myself and don't want to take any risks. But, who takes the risks? The young people usually take risks. And that's because they are idealistic and also because they realize that their future are dependent on it. And we can talk about this if you want also, why Palestine was so important, is so important in the same way that South Africa was important for us to act on in the 1970s and 1980s. In brief, I can say it's because these areas expose Western hypocrisies. Western world claims it's for human rights, it's for international law, but then they support apartheid, racist, genocidal regimes like the ones in South Africa, or was in South Africa, and now running the state of Israel. In our case, it's even worse than South Africa. So I think there's a lot of reasons for people not being engaged. But there's also very good reasons for people becoming engaged. And we see a growth of the movement, incredible growth of the movement, especially in the past 10 months since this intensified genocide. So we see that happening, and I'm optimistic it will continue to grow around the world. I visited Mumbai once and I spoke to hundreds of people. I was amazed at the level of interest, among especially the people that are oppressed, the so-called lower castes, because the enemy for all of us is the same. The enemy is the greedy people. That's why Modi's best friend is Netanyahu, and they go golfing together and things like that.
Thank you, Dr. Qumsiyeh. My question relates to what you've mentioned. World protests have been focusing on Gaza, but Israel's also stepped up its settler assault in Palestinians in the West Bank and across Palestine. I have a map on my door that shows what Palestine looked like in 1948, and then it keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So now it's pretty much confined to Gaza and the West Bank. But I wondered if you could speak about the conditions beyond Gaza in greater Palestine. What are the conditions of life for Palestinians outside of Gaza?
Yes, thank you for this question. The situation in the rest of Palestine, Gaza represents about 2% or 2.5% of historic Palestine. The rest of Palestine is under an apartheid racist regime that engages in regular killing, kidnapping people, including children, torture, even rapes in prisons. Israeli gulags are full of Palestinians, men, women, children, elderly people. This is happening throughout historic Palestine. And there's restrictions on movement, of course, for us in the West Bank. If I talk just about Bethlehem, for example, Bethlehem is a ghetto, basically. We in the Bethlehem area are living on about 13% of the district land of Bethlehem. 87% of the district land of Bethlehem is now controlled by racist, genocidal settlers who go on the rampage once in a while, killing Palestinians, burning houses, burning their cars, etc. This happened actually just about 2 days ago, in the night of Thursday, when they went into a village called Jit near Nablus, killed one person, critically injured another, and injured many others less critically, and burned many cars and many houses. And the Israeli army was watching them and didn't do anything, of course, because the Israeli army is also part of the settler movement. So the situation is not pretty here. It's not nice. It's very, very difficult to live here. They make our lives as difficult as they can. I teach at Bethlehem University, as you heard. Our students cannot get to the university. Most of our courses now have online connections so that they can do, and that's if the online works. It's difficult because of the restrictions on movement.
We are speaking with Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh from the Institute for Biotechnology and Sustainability and the founder and director of the Palestine Museum of Natural History. I think we have one more question.
I would like to ask that after the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh and Hezbollah's military leader, so we see that there is a new unity of Palestinian resistance groups. What will this mean for the liberation movement? And has the demand for one secular state increased support within the Palestinian movement? And if so, then what
Right.
for the future?
Yeah, I mean, Palestinians under colonization for 8 decades, and even before, under the British rule, we started, the British occupied Palestine in 1919, and they appointed the Zionist leader of Palestine at the time, a so-called High Commissioner. His name is Herbert Samuel, who segregated schools, public schools, who supported Zionism, supported removal of Palestinians. So we're talking at over 100 years of resistance. There are many, many dozens of Palestinian factions that some came and went. Some existed in the 1920s, for example, and were gone by the 1930s. Some were created in the 1930s, etc. And then there are more modern groups of resistance, like Fatah and the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, and the Islamic Resistance Movement, known by its acronym Hamas, which stands for Harakat Muqawama Islamiyya, or Islamic Resistance Movement. The latter ones are, of course, the one that exist now. There are 12 Palestinian factions that exist now. Each one has its own ideology, its own tactics, its own strategy, its own methods. And that is understandable in the context of colonization. In South Africa under apartheid, same thing existed. There were things like the African National Congress, the Pan-African Congress, groups like the Christian communities that engaged, like Desmond Tutu, that engaged using nonviolent resistance, etc. There's always such a diversity of resistance groups in the context of colonization and apartheid and racism. So I am not here to speak to the ideologies of each one of them, and that would take us another hour of time. And Hamas is just one of those groups. And, I am not a supporter of Hamas or of any of the other groups in terms of ideology. Or ideas, if you want. I am independent. I'm for a secular democracy, one democratic state group. We have a group that's working on this. We believe in a democracy that's inclusive of all the people. We are anti-Zionist, as is Hamas, as is essentially all the Palestinian factions. So it's just a matter of, as you expect, different people have different methodologies. And to be modest and to be humble, one cannot say, well, it's my way or the highway. You either do it my way or I hate you. No, I mean, it's different people have different backgrounds and different ideologies. And everybody has a right to resist by the method they choose to. As I said, that's what international law says. So it gives us the right to resist by the methods that we choose. I have my own methods. I'm happy to talk about them. I'm not interested in addressing, what other people are doing. I do want to say, since you mentioned Haniya was actually the most moderate of the people of Hamas. And he was the most inclusive and most accommodating of the other factions when he was in Gaza, and when he was basically appointed prime minister, the first and the last Hamas member to become prime minister, short-lived for 1 year, because Israel and the United States demolished, the rule of that prime minister, Haniya. But he was very inclusive of all Palestinian factions, and he was very accommodating in negotiations with Israel on the hostages. That's why assassinating him, in my humble opinion, was intended to assassinate the possibility of an exchange of hostages, exchange of prisoners of war between Hamas, between the resistance in Gaza and the Israeli government. That's a sad turn of events, but it shows Israeli intentions are not to have hostages released. Their intentions is bigger than that. Their intentions is to do hegemony, and not just on Palestine, but the whole Arab world, basically, and much beyond. Actually, they have their arms in India and Australia and New Zealand and everywhere else.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Qumsiyeh. I wanted to clarify for webinar participants, if you have questions for Dr. Qumsiyeh, you can put those in the Q&A. It's at the bottom of your screen, and then we will share those questions with Dr. Qumsiyeh. We have another speaker. In the past, we've had speakers from the United States and from Pakistan. Today, we have a student activist from Malaysia. He's at the University of Nottingham in Malaysia, Muhammad Suleiman. He's the leader of the Malaysian Students Against Genocide. The difficulty we had was 11 o'clock in the US, 9 p.m. in Pakistan is the middle of the night in Malaysia. So what we have presented for you today is a recorded interview that I conducted with Muhammad Suleiman, and we'll show this here now. I think we want to begin, Muhammad, with maybe you could explain for the webinar participants what exactly the organization, the Malaysian Students Against Genocide, what some of their activities are. I know you talked about some die-ins. Maybe you could explain what that is, and also that you had some activities trying to get the university to divest from Israeli organizations. So, but maybe you can just share with us some of the activities that you've been doing at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia.
All right, so one of the activities that we've done on campus, as mentioned, is the die-in style of solidarity actions. So what die-ins are basically is a form of solidarity action where we will lie flat on the ground, and we will be holding some blackboards up as well with relevant messages. So what this is symbolic of basically is the death of the people from the genocide. And it is also very profoundly emotional as well, since we are doing this in front of crowds of people. So it further symbolizes people just walking across and viewing the death of these people in the genocide. So that's the concept of it in of it itself. So we've done this in places such as the cafeteria. And we really want to bring awareness to all of the students and also the generally all of the people there regarding the genocide in Gaza as well. And we also on the blackboards as well, we've also shared messages on how we as people can actually take action in regards to this genocide, and it has to be quite immediate since the situation is extremely dire as well. So we've also actually do some walking as well with the blackboards around campus occasionally, and we've actually engaged with students also directly during these walkings, and it's been very effective actually. We've got a lot of people's attention. There's a lot of traction from people to actually want to join in with our actions as well, and also there's a lot of talk going around in our social media as well regarding our actions. So it's very interesting to see the response that we've gotten from the students as well. And we are honestly very grateful that the response has been quite positive as well.
Yes, that's very good. One of the things that you mentioned in the emails that we exchanged was that there was a campaign for asking the University of Nottingham's a British university, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the campus is in Malaysia. So one of the things that you mentioned was attempt to asking UNM to divest from Israeli, I don't know, Israeli corporations.
Mhm.
Did you do that, or what's that form of that take? Because I know they've made some attempts in the United States to ask for universities to divest, and I know Evergreen State College in Washington actually moved to divest, and some of the other campuses, like at Northwestern in Chicago, said that they would meet with students to talk about divestment. So, but I wondered what kind of activities did you make an appeal to the board of directors, or was there some other path that you took?
So for us, we sort of took this path of supporting our fellow people at the UK campus itself, because over there they've actually have had an encampment where they have demanded divestments directly from the management there at the UK campus. So we've mainly been talking about it on our social media platforms as well. And also during our die-in actions, we've also demanded actions and boycotting as well on our blackboards. So that's basically how we've approached for the divestments. But we as an organization, we have not directly engaged with the administration as well.
So you're doing solidarity with British encampments that are doing solidarity with the struggle in Palestine. So it's like solidarity with solidarity with solidarity.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting. And you did say that the response by and large has been positive from students on the Malaysia campus.
Yeah. It has definitely been positive.
Yes. And that's manifest by students joining in your walks or joining in the die-ins. That's how you could measure what the responses are.
Besides that as well, we've also been kind of looking through social media platforms, because our university has a lot of like kind of talk pages as well, where a lot of students can just give their thoughts as well. And definitely our actions have been at times a hot topic on those types of pages, and we've been able to directly see the comments of many students in regards to our actions and how they're also actually very supportive of us. However, we've definitely noticed there were obviously a few comments that were showing their sort of concern about our actions in a way, as in they're not so sure like how it's related to them. But that's also one thing we've been trying to do, is actually spread awareness on how this situation actually relates to us as students, because we as the academic society have to stand against these crimes against humanity, because the people in Gaza, the universities there, they're unfortunately not able to operate anymore because of the ongoing genocide. So it is highly relevant to us, honestly. And also humanitarian wise, it is honestly relevant to most people as well.
I have a question that maybe goes in a little bit different direction. In 1948, Israel began what the Palestinians call the Nakba. And I don't know much about Malaysian history, but I do know in 1948, the British also declared a state of emergency, and they began an offensive against the Malaysian population and also some Chinese immigrants, which included starvation. And even though the United States is known for using Agent Orange in Vietnam, it actually was first used in Malaysia against the population, the indigenous population in Malaysia. So, and I also know very little, but I do know that there was up to 1 million people put into concentration camps. And the British War against independence lasted until 1957. Which is when Malaysia finally won its independence from the British. So I wonder if there is any connection between that history of British colonialism and an identity that can make a connection with the Palestinians, who are also facing a different kind of colonialism, a settler colonial Israeli state, a Zionist state, as opposed to British settler colonialism. So I just wonder if that affects not just students, but does it affect the wider community? Is there a remembrance of that history?
Yes, definitely. That is a huge part I've seen as well from the bigger population of Malaysia as well. There's definitely we can see ourselves a lot in the situation that's been going on as well in Palestine, and there's a connection as well with British colonialism as well. On the wider scale, yes, it is highly related to us. And also with regards to that, Malaysia is also a primarily Islamic country as well. And the Palestinian cause is also highly intertwined with Islam as well in terms of the resistance movement as well. So we as Malaysians have definitely shown a great amount of support as well for the Palestinian cause. So in relation to the history with us students specifically, it has also been in talks during our own classes as well, since this is another way that we can relate this to our academic community as well, because it is honestly so related to us. It truly is. And we as the academic society and also our society at large must kind of call for action for this against the genocide. We have to largely condemn it because it is truly related to us by a large part.
I teach at Purdue University, and we've had some panels where we've had some speakers, but it sounds like you're saying that sometimes these conversations occur in the actual classroom. It kind of bubbles up in the conversations. Is that accurate?
It's definitely accurate. Especially it's mainly brought by us students as well, since it's a very interesting point to make. It's not a part of the lectures themselves, but it is more so since we are Malaysian students and the lectures tend to be international. So we would just like to kind of bridge that conversation and kind of relate it to the international scale as well.
Excellent. We did not have a die-in that you had, but we planted flags outside of buildings at the Purdue campus, and students would come by, like you said, they would join with the placards and join the die-in. But we had students that would post the flags and plant the flags, and you know, give positive responses to what we were doing out there. So one of the things that we've sought to do with this webinar, last month we had a student from Pakistan. The first month we had a student from the United States. And now you're from Malaysia, because as we say with the webinar, it's one world, one struggle. And students have been leading that effort in almost every country. So that's very impressive for us. Is there anything else that you would like to say to the webinar on behalf of the Malaysian Students Against Genocide?
From our side, we would just like to say that we are fully in support of the Palestinian cause and what all of us have been doing in support of it. It is going in such a great direction, and I believe a webinar is a perfect way to spread awareness on the genocide that is ongoing in Palestine, as well as in relation to a myriad of other international issues as well, in a variety of countries as well, and relating it to the Palestinian cause as well. So that is one thing. Another thing that we would like to share is that we are so thankful for this opportunity for us to be able to speak on what we've done as students here in Malaysia, to speak on the Palestinian cause, since as mentioned previously, it is so intertwined in our lives as well, and we've been taught about the Palestinian cause ever since we were young. In our primary schools, we've been taught about the Palestinian cause as well, and the genocide that's been put on them as well by the Israelis. So it is truly related to us by a lot. And we as a Malaysian society, we truly do stand with Palestine in regards to their movement.
Maybe a last question here would be, are there any Zionist organizations that function visibly in Malaysia? I mean, we have many in the United States, although there's also an equally large number of Jewish Voice for Peace and other more progressive Jewish organizations. But we have the Zionist groups, including the Christian Zionist groups, and I'm not sure what the lay of the land is in Malaysia. Are there such organizations, either Christian or Zionist organizations that function?
Religious based, I don't believe so from what I know. However, I know that there are certain manufacturer companies that are linked with the Zionists as well. And there's been multiple actions done by people here to make the government in general to divest from those sorts of companies as well, such as CAT. And it is definitely something that does exist in this country, unfortunately.
Yeah, so you're talking about CAT, that means Caterpillar, because the Israeli government has bought bulldozers to tear down Palestinian homes, and I did not know there was a Caterpillar manufacturer in Malaysia, but that makes sense because Caterpillar is an international organization. So there's been demonstrations in front of Caterpillar or with the government to say, stop that production, stop that trade with Israel. Yes, excellent. Well, I want to thank you so much, Mohammed Suleiman, for joining us for the webinar. And this will be part of the last 20 minutes or so of the webinar that's going to happen on August 17th. I believe I've sent you the invitation, and if you would share that with other Malaysian students against genocide, that would be appreciated so they can see what you had to say and also see what Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh is going to speak about. So thank you again, and I hope that we stay in touch and that we talk soon.
Yes, I hope we can definitely stay in touch. And I have also shared the invitation with a lot of my fellow peers as well, and also my family members and other people that I know as well. They're really interested in joining in to the webinar and seeing what's been talked about by not only by me in this interview, but as well by the organizers as well and the panelists.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Mohammed. And I definitely will be in touch.
Thank you so much for the opportunity once again, and you're always welcome. This has been a really great conversation.
And as they say, inshallah,
Inshallah.
Palestine will win. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was our video interview with Mohammed Suleiman from Malaysia. I wanted to remind everybody that if you have questions for Dr. Qumsiyeh, they can be written in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. I also wanted to announce on September 14th, we're going to have another webinar on Palestine. We had planned to have 3 on Palestine, but given the recent Israeli expansion with the that threatens regional conflict, we've decided to hold another webinar on Palestine. We will be providing the registration link for September 14th to all of the participants in past webinars and to supporting organizations next week. I should also remind everyone that we will also share with you the YouTube link for viewing this at some other time, and we will share that with all participants and groups, which includes the first webinar we had with Dr. Ramzi Baroud from the Palestine Chronicle, and the second one with Dr. Benjamin Balthazar from Jewish Voice for Peace. And then today's, we will be sharing the conversation we had with Dr. Qumsiyeh and the recording that we did with Mohammed Suleiman. So thank you for that. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. There were a couple questions that we had for Dr. Qumsiyeh that kind of got lost in our conversation. So one of them was, What has been the response of Palestinian students and faculty to the activities of the Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability?
Thank you. And thanks for that interview with this Malaysian student, Muhammad. This is great. What they are doing, kudos, I would say to them. For Palestinians here, you know, our lives are basically shaped by what's going on around us. And so a lot of people are really looking for signs of hope. And this is what our institute provides. It provides an oasis of hope in the middle of mayhem, in the middle of, you know, the bleak situation that exists thanks to, I don't say the Zionists alone, but the American, British, French, German, Australian support of Zionism and full partnership in their crimes against humanity and war crimes that they're engaged in. This global, you know, challenge for us is sometimes can feel overwhelming, whether for students or faculty or anybody, because it's very unusual to have a genocide supported by a number of countries. So people are looking for any sign of hope, any sign of lighting a candle, so to speak, in the middle of the darkness. And we think our institute provides that. And the people who come here, they tell us that this is what it does to them. When I see children here who are playing, who are enjoying wild flowers, or feeding some chickens and some animals we have in the garden, I see hope, and I see children are leading our hope. And so I think this is what I see this institute as doing, one of many institutes like this. But I think we're the only one focused on biodiversity and has a natural history museum and things like that. So, I'm, you know, I am cautiously optimistic. I am always hopeful, but optimism is something else, of course. I'm cautiously optimistic that we shall have our freedom soon, and that we will win this, and then this institute can focus on more environmentally pressing issues, also like climate change and pollution and things like that, in much higher level than what we are doing now.
Thank you for that. We do have a question in the Q&A from a European. The question is, it seems to the people in Europe that Muslim countries, especially the extremely rich ones, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and to some extent Syria, they don't seem to be helping Palestine. Rather, they seem to do shamefully little. This is the question. So Israel's surrounded by Muslim countries, but they don't seem to go into business or this is a question that you addressed earlier, but the question is, why is there so little response from Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, UAE, Oman, Bahrain, other countries that seem to have wealth, but there doesn't seem to be much support for the Palestinian liberation movement?
Thank you for that question. Indeed, this is a very important question, and the reasons are very obvious. If we go back in history, who created these countries? Who actually set up a country called, quote unquote, Saudi Arabia, a country named after a family of thieves, basically. They were thieves of caravans that go to Mecca, and the Saud tribe, that's their profession, if you want, was raiding the caravans going to Mecca. Who set up the Saud royal family in power in what became known, quote unquote, Saudi Arabia. Who set up these countries like Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Kuwait? Who drew these borders? I think the answer is very obvious, and history has it, which is it was the imperial powers, beginning with Britain and France, and increasingly the United States as the hegemonic power in the world, putting these dictators to run these quote-unquote states where there shouldn't be states, because we never had the concept of nation states in the Arab world. So they set up these puppets to serve their own interests, their own imperial and Zionist interests, by the way, because as I said earlier, Britain wanted to create a Jewish state from the Balfour Declaration. France, the same thing with the Jew-Cambon Declaration. This is 1917. So, so the whole division of the Middle East into these states and putting dictators, tin pot dictators, banana republics, if you want, to serve imperial and Western interests, is typical of colonialists, divide and conquer, if you want. Now, that's about the political leadership. Of course, I'm not talking about the people. The people in those countries, like Hijaz, what is also known as Saudi Arabia, quote unquote, I refuse to acknowledge that the country is called Saudi Arabia. But anyway, in the Hijaz region of that area, most people support Palestine. The same thing in the other parts of the Arab world and the Muslim world. It is when you have leaders that are whether elected or unelected or whatever that come to power that want to deviate even an iota from the agenda that's put to them, they're killed and removed from power, as happened in many countries in our region, like Iraq with Saddam Hussein, or Libya with Gaddafi, or many other countries in which the imperial powers toppled government. Sometimes governments that they themselves set up, like Mubarak in Egypt, they toppled him. They allowed him to be toppled, hoping to get another more acceptable dictator. And when that didn't happen, then they removed the new leadership that was elected in Egypt, and they put another dictator called Sisi in power, who's helping strangulate the people of Gaza. But of course, the people of Egypt, 99.9% of them support the Palestinian struggle, but they are, their necks are under the boots of this dictator who's appointed by the CIA and the Mossad. That's what drives the politics of these countries. But this is not just in the Muslim and Arab world. In any country, you have to think about it. Look at what happened in Latin America. Look at the vicious attacks on Venezuela, even after free and clear election results. They don't like the Venezuelan leadership of Maduro because he supports Palestine. So they want to topple him and put another dictator who supports Zionism and supports imperialism. This is global phenomenon, not just in the Muslim world. Of course, we are very thankful for the Arab and Muslim countries, whether mixed Arab, Muslim, it doesn't matter to us, who support human rights. And those are countries usually that are besieged, attacked viciously. Look at Yemen, look at Lebanon, look at Iran. They are attacked viciously because they dare speak out for Palestinian rights. And it doesn't matter, again, if they're Muslim or Arab or whatever. I mean, Lebanon is not particularly Muslim, it's a mixed country, but the Christian, Muslims, Maronites, everybody in Lebanon supports resistance against Israel. So, of course, Lebanon is being starved, like many countries that are going to stand up to American imperialism. Vietnam stood up to the Americans, North Korea, other countries.
Dr. Qumsiyeh, I think that we will ask you to do a little plug for One World, One Struggle in the future. You just made this connection about from Venezuela to the Middle East, to India, to Iran, Yemen, Lebanon, that it's all part of a holistic unit. So we may be asking you for a little promotional for the One World, One Struggle webinars in the future. There is a comment from a Malaysian student, I assume. It said that just yesterday, Malaysia brought 127 Palestinians for medical care into Malaysia. And they said this is an act of solidarity. And they also make the comment that they would encourage other countries to adopt the same action and the support. And in your comment just now, Dr. Qumsiyeh, you talked about you being optimistic, but I wonder what your expectations are. What is to be done to end the conflict, to end the Israeli assault, and to achieve environmental sustainability? What needs to be done now?
This is a very good question. In all humility, each of us has a job to do. Each of us has a responsibility. Each of us can do their work within their own sphere to affect the global change. And together we can make a difference in this world. I urge you to get involved. Now, how do you get involved? What can you do individually? You cannot, of course, tell countries, do this and do that, and they will do it. No, that's not how the world works. If I lived in the United States for many years. If I look at the positive things that happened in the United States itself over the years, like ending the genocidal war in Vietnam, or getting civil rights, or getting women's right to vote, or getting the US government to stop support for apartheid in South Africa. All of these things happened when enough people mobilized. So you and I, everyone on this call, and everybody you can reach, and I urge you to reach out to others, mobilize them to do something. And there's a lot that can be done. You can, now with the availability of the internet, for example, you can expose the lies. You can show videos from Gaza. This is the most documented genocide in human history. People are literally even videotaping their own deaths. Massacres that are being committed. Don't shy away from sharing graphic things, telling people what's going on with US and imperial Western support. Speak out at your universities, at your colleges, in your church, in your mosque, in your temple, wherever you are. Always speak out. And if you want some ideas, you can go to my website, qumsiyeh.org, my last name.org, which is down there shown on my name, qumsiyeh.org. And you can email me, by the way, at mazin@qumsiyeh.org. And I'd love to add you to our email list. But anyway, on my website, qumsiyeh.org, there's many actions listed under a link called What You Can Do. So I urge you to get involved and to contact me. I put you on our email list, which has some action items that are posted regularly. I'm about to post another email with action items. as I said, we can make a difference. Each of us can make a difference. But collectively, we can turn the ship around. And by the way, the ship is like the Titanic. It will sink with everybody on board, including the Zionists and everybody else. If we don't get our act together. Another connection I wanted to say, basically, that we have two, Lee, you mentioned this, connectivity of different struggles. The reason this is critical at this point in history is the Zionists and their American supporters and their British government supporters, they think they can engage in a regional war, maybe even global war with China and Russia and Iran and Pakistan on one end, and maybe with they think that Israel and the U.S. and NATO and Saudi Arabia and whatever, India maybe on the other side, that these global wars are winnable, that there will be winners and losers. This is stupid. Anybody who knows the modern technology and what we have in terms of like laser technologies and satellites and nuclear and hydrogen bombs knows that the only winners in the next war, global war I'm talking about, are going to be cockroaches because they are resistant to nuclear radiation. All of us will die, or most of the human species will die, except those in remote islands, like whatever, New Zealand or whatever. And you know, but civilization will be ended as we know it. And as I said, cockroaches will take over the earth. If that is what you want, then sit back and enjoy the show. If that's not what you want, if you want a world in which we coexist, in which we have sustainability of human and natural communities, then you should join us to work against wars, against this colonialism, against imperialism, against the catastrophic environmental challenges that face us as a planet. This is my plea to you, to join this movement. It's a global movement. It is growing, but the faster it grows, the sooner we end this nightmare. And hopefully we have that window to change things. Otherwise, we all lose, as I said. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that. We just have a few minutes left here, so if anyone has a question for Dr. Qumsiyeh, you can use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen to ask the question. There was one question that was asked. Someone was looking for tips or strategies on how to use social media. I should say that Dr. Abida, Dr. Bushra, and I have been talking about this recently, and we are about to create 90-second podcasts, short clips that can then be posted to they could be posted to Instagram, they could be posted to Facebook, they could be posted to short YouTube videos. And as soon as we have those ready, again, we will send that out to all of the people that have participated in any of the webinars over the past few months. And we will share that with everybody. That's about as good a question, about as good an answer as I can provide to somebody that's interested in social media. We are going to prepare some short podcasts that can be used and downloaded to all of your social media.
By the way, I cannot post to the whole attendees list. If you can post my email to them.
Yes, if you would like us to do that, I can send that out when we send out the invitation to the next.
So people can reach out. And I also noted there's another question on the question and answer from anonymous attendee. How do you overcome fatigue and when you don't see a lot of response to what you do or what you send? I presume you have an experience with this. Sending, sometimes I have an email list that has 55,000 emails on it. And some days I post some things I think very important, and I get very, very few responses. But I do know people are reading them. Why? Because I asked one time. And I also, when there's something very controversial, I got a lot of reactions. So I know that they are reading, and that's important. But reaching out, you don't have to get, if you have 100 people you send to, and one of them responds, well, that's one who's interested, 1 out of 100, 1%, that's a good number. And that one can reach out to another group and reach out, and you have that ripple effect. So my point is, don't get despair, don't get burned out, face yourself. There's a Buddhist saying, old Buddhist saying, that we should have joyful participation in the sorrows of this world. Joyful participation in the sorrows of this world. I like this because, you have participation. You need not to be apathetic. You need to participate. You need to do things. You have to do it joyfully. You cannot do it with bitterness and with malice or with, that's actually makes your enemies win over you when they make you feel too depressed if you want to do anything. And I tell people, go out, smell the roses, whatever's left roses out of you. When I see in Gaza people still dancing dabka, or children still being entertained by clowns in the tent cities, people still want to live. I have friends in Gaza who are planting seeds. We managed to get some seeds to them. We do not have the luxury of despair. We must stay going. And for me, this is the last thing I'll say about this, action is the antidote to despair. The reason I keep my sanity, the reason I'm not in a mental institution now, is because I work 15, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, as full-time volunteer, by the way. I don't get a salary from anybody. The reverse of that, my wife and I donated what we saved in the US to create this institute. By the way, the institute website, if you want to know more about what we do, it's PalestineNature.org, Palestine Nature, one word, .org. You can look at the website, you can see videos of our work. You can also volunteer to come here and work with us, or volunteer from abroad. And we will show you how such volunteering and support for us from abroad even gives you a lot of positive energy, a lot of charges of positivism, which we all need at one point or another in our life.
Thank you for that. I agree that action is the antidote to despair. I would also say that when we take action with others, we have that network, that community that we can get energy from. And we realize that we indeed are not alone. And I think that's very important. One of the ways that we overcome fatigue is by getting energy from others. And when we work with others, we get to share that energy amongst all of us. So, well, thank you, Dr. Qumsiyeh. Thank you, Dr. Abida, Dr. Bushra. Thank you for Mohammed Suleiman talking with us earlier on, so we were able to include him in this webinar. We will share the links to PalestineNature.org and to Dr. Qumsiyeh's email when we send out the announcement of the YouTube to all of our participants in all of the webinars that we've had thus far. So, Dr. Abida, is there some closing comment you would like to make?
Thank you, Dr. Ali. It is really a treat to listen to Dr. Qumsiyeh. As a Pakistani, I would like to share something. Pakistan, from the day one, from its inception, stands with Palestine. Here I would like to share a few things that are said by the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Qaid-e-Azam, popularly known as Qaid-e-Azam, and he was barrister and was qualified from Lincoln Inn. He was much concerned about the legal points included in the Balfour Declaration in 1917. And because he understood that the declaration document would ruin the future of Muslims in the Middle East. I would like to share from 1936 when All India Muslim League, AIML, observed Palestine Day to show solidarity with the Palestinians. That is even before the establishment of Pakistan. And later on in 1939, All India Muslim League in its Lucknow, which is in India, Lucknow session, criticized the British role of slicing Palestine. And after the creation of Pakistan, it was in 1947 that our first foreign minister, Sir Zafarullah Khan, when he was representing Pakistan in United States in a debate on Palestine partition in the UN General Assembly, he stated, I would like to quote his statement, that Western forces were forcibly driving a Western wedge into the heart of the Middle East. So, and he warned that this would face the world will face the consequences of this partition. And afterwards, this is from the recent history in Pakistan, that it was in 2008 and 9 that our private TV channel, Geo, for the coverage of the post-conflict 2008 and 9 war, the correspondent Hamid Mir was there directly giving coverage to Gaza. And later on, with reference to Freedom Flotilla, our popular journalist Sayyid Talat Hussain, along with his crew, he was there at the Freedom Flotilla, and then he was arrested by Israel. So, and there were so many other Pakistanis. So Pakistanis stand with Palestine from the day one, even before the establishment of Pakistan. With these words, I would really like to thank you from the core of my heart, and on behalf of MCAP and Purdue University and Punjab University, for sharing your ideas and enlightening us, since you are located in Bethlehem, directly from Palestine. So I was wondering that whenever we watch Al Jazeera, especially Al Jazeera and other videos portraying the miserable conditions, the destruction in Gaza, and then the health conditions, and the way children are suffering. So it becomes really bitter and quite intolerable to see all these things. And then we think that how the Palestinians will be bearing all these things, because seeing such scenes brings tears to our eyes. And so how do you tolerate these things? But you have beautifully said that action is the antidote to despair, and then life goes on, and we have to keep the spirit high. So thank you once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. We will be sending out the YouTube link and the registration for our September 14th seminar very shortly. And if you've already attended one of the webinars, you'll be receiving those notices, including how to get a hold of Dr. Qumsiyeh and the PalestineNature.org. I will send all of that information out shortly. Thank you, Dr. Qumsiyeh. Thank you, Dr. Abida. Thank you, Dr. Bushra. And thank you to Mohammed Suleiman for providing us with a taped interview. And we will see you all hopefully next September 14th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.